Greetings from the spectral dimension of Paranormal M. Prepare to be spooked by tales that defy the laws of reality. Subscribe, turn on notifications to stay up to date with our chilling narratives. We hope you have a hauntingly good time, and don't forget to leave a comment and like the video. Help us keep these things kind of chugging along. Story number 1. Some weird, tall thing. So I live in Southwest Virginia, and I'm pretty skeptical about stuff. But this, I cannot deny. So I'd be out in the woods near my house with some buddies, and we always have a good time. But I'll never forget the nights that we saw this thing. It's a tall, bulky, light gray, hunched over, maybe damn near 9 foot tall, bipedal figure. The first time I'd seen it, we were out riding our four-wheelers, and shit when I seen something pretty large pass by the path behind us. I was on the back rack, facing backwards. I brushed it off as some kind of maybe wildlife. Maybe there was something like that around here, because there's loads of shit like that out here. But eventually we'd made our way to our campsite and settled down. Nice fire going, real bright. Then we kept hearing shit around us, and felt like we were being watched. I grabbed my flashlight, shined it around the outside of the firelight. After some scanning, there was nothing, so we brushed it off as maybe a possum. Then, I got the bright idea to shine it roughly 50 yards out past an old broken-down tanker that was nearby to us. There it was. From the bushes, we'd seen a pair of silver gleaming eyes. They seemed to just be locked onto us. So we panicked, hopped up on our rides, booked it out of there. One night, me and my other buddy went out just searching around for a new campsite for us. We eventually wound up in an old junkyard where there was an old shut-down coal mine. We found a real nice spot, and it wasn't far from our old one at all. We set some stuff up to mark where we were for the rest of us, when we heard a big, loud bang. Like an old car door slamming. Spooked us pretty good. So we set the marks, packed up, and boogied on out of there. We was nearly out when I seen those damn unforgettable eyes, maybe 70-ish yards out. We picked up the paces and eventually got back to a gate on the main road. As we hopped that gate, we'd heard a god-awful groan maybe 20 yards out. Shivered our spines good. Another day I was out on my porch alone, just taking in the night air, when I seen the brush moving, and I yet again brushed it off. But I hear that damn groan again. My hair stood up like it had 20 million volts going through me. I hollered at it, and it just went flying through that brush. But then, the last time I'd run into it, it was the worst. I was by myself looking for my phone. I'd lost it, over near our campsite. I had my bright light, my old 9mm with me. I got to an old broken-down truck, where I had it last, and I thank God that I found it. I seen a deer run through the path in front of me, just running up the path behind me. so I made it to a clear spot and done a little scan on the field behind me. I seen the glow of deer's eyes, thought nothing of it. But them things slowly got up to shit nearly 10 feet tall. I got a few shots at it, 'cause I was scared damn near death. Once them eyes started chasing me at that same height, they stood up. I booked on out of that shithole and haven't been back since. My family had always told me stories of these mountains, and I never believed them up until now. I remember a while back my old uncle was telling me about these things that people would see, and that there's been a family of them for decades here. Story number 2. My encounter with Mr. Boots. Back in 2019, I attended the Edinburgh Film Festival, and it was my first time visiting the city. I had an amazing time, and one night I decided to take some time off watching films to do some tourist-like activities in the hostel where I was staying. And I saw a leaflet for the Edinburgh Vault Tours, which I thought would be fascinating as I'm a serious history buff. If you don't know what the Edinburgh Vaults are, they are like a series of chambers formed in the 19th arches of the South Bridge of Edinburgh, this is in Scotland, which were used to house a number of different businesses until they became a shelter for the homeless. The tour was a ghost, quote-unquote, tour of the seedy part of the old town of Edinburgh. And despite having some slightly paranormal experiences in the past, I felt pretty confident that I could handle going on my own. The first part of the tour took place above ground, and to be honest, it wasn't particularly great, as it was the middle of June, and despite being around 6 or 7 p.m., it was sunny and bright, which didn't really create the right atmosphere. The tour guide led us to the entrance of the vaults, which we entered through a normal building and down a flight of stairs. Before we went into the vaults, she told us to make sure our shoelaces were tied. I double-tied my laces, as I didn't want to trip up as the floor was very uneven. This was where the tour really started to get interesting. The guide told us about the history of the place and the ghosts that apparently resided there. One of them is known as Mr. Boots. They're an evil spirit who can be heard stomping around in boots. The other is a small boy that attaches itself to women that he considers to be motherly in figure, and he likes to grab their hand, and is known to untie shoelaces. The unnamed boy is apparently scared of Mr. Boots. As a tour group, we walk from room to room as the tour guide recounts different stories of ghostly encounters. We enter one room where there used to be a fireplace, which the guide is in front of. In the archway there's a couple, and I'm stood next to them, facing the guide and the couple. I decide to take a photo of the guide and the couple when suddenly, behind the couple, I see this man. I've never seen a face full of so much hate and evil in basically my entire life. I can't even find the words to describe how menacing that they looked. Their face looked twisted with hate. They looked human. A tall figure wearing a long black coat or a cloak, wearing a top hat. They had white, pale skin. The figure wasn't transparent, but solid. The moment I saw him, the entire left side of my body went numb and cold. And I mean frozen. It's like as cold as if the side of my body had frozen completely. I felt something yank at my left hand. I pulled my eyes away from the figure in the archway to look down at the left-hand side of my body. There's nothing next to me, no one pulling on my hand. And when I go up to look up, Mr. Boots is gone. Thank God. The guide starts to move everyone to the next room, and I seriously don't want to walk through the archway. But I know I can't stay in the small room any longer. I go to move when I look down at my left shoe to see if the shoelace is undone. Only it's not just undone. The shoelace looks like it's been wrapped around someone's finger, and they had piled it on the side of my shoe. Can't help but gasp out loud and call the guide over. She looks at it baffled and says that she's never seen that happen to anyone before. I don't know why, but I was too scared to tell her about seeing Mr. Boots, because I felt like I couldn't tell her I would somehow maybe get in trouble if I did. I felt like I was suddenly back to being a little kid. I wasn't the only person in the tour group to have a paranormal experience. There was this big bodybuilder type man who was clearly thought to be in the whole tour, and was just nonsense. He stood in the corner of this room next to a wall, just minding his own business, when suddenly he jumped and looked behind him. Apparently he heard someone clap in his ear, but there wasn't anyone behind him and no one else in the group had clapped. I'm nearly at the end of the story, so thank you for sticking with me so far. The last bit is what happened to me back at the hostel when I returned after the tour. I had been sharing a room with a few other girls, and I was retelling my experience, minus seeing Mr. Boots because I thought no one would believe me. The girls thought the tour sounded really interesting, and we chatted for a bit about Scotland in general before I decided to go to sleep. As I was lying in my bunk, excuse my audio, I was suddenly overcome by that feeling of being frozen, paralyzed again, like I had experienced back in the vault. My eyes were half open. And I could see the two girls still talking, sitting on the bed. I remember wanting to call out to them, but I couldn't. I don't know how long I was stuck like this, but eventually I found that I could open my eyes fully and I could move again. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. If people are interested in some context, I've always had strange experiences on the left-hand side of my body. What I mean by this is that whenever anything paranormal happens, I feel a shiver go down the entire left-hand side of my body. You know that feeling you get when someone walks over your grave? Well, that's what I feel. When I was there, I was involved in a terrible accident where my dress caught on fire and I was badly burnt. The part of my body most affected is the left part. Story number 3. Ask Reddit. When I was around 10 years old, I woke up to what I thought was my mom calling my name. I remember wincing my eyes when I sat up in bed, like someone had just turned on the lights. I opened my eyes and there was an angel at the foot of my bed. It was so bright I couldn't look at it for long periods of time. It looked exactly like how angels are depicted in the art and religious texts. I remember it had its arms out with its head tilted a little down and to the side. It had hairs to its shoulders that had neither feminine or male features, like it could have been either or from its appearance. Its eyes were closed, and it didn't have a halo or anything, just an extremely bright light and an aura around it and behind it. It was massive and seemed like it was coming from another dimension or an open portal because it wouldn't fit in the space in front of my bed. Normally, I would have freaked out and screamed for my mom or ran to their room. But it brought this calming warmth, safety-like energy that filled the room. I've never felt anything like it before. But if I had to compare it to something, I would say how a baby feels inside their mother's womb. So I'm trying to look at this angel and it starts speaking to me, but it's in my head. I remember the vibrations were so loud when it spoke that I said, "Ouch," and kind of put my hands on my head in response to this intensity. It lowered the vibrations and asked me, "Is this better?" I responded, "Yes." Its mouth never moved. It was a conversation telepathically. I remember asking simple 10-year-old questions like, "Are you a boy or a girl?" Responded with, "I am neither male nor female." Things like that. When it gave me answers, it was like an instant answer and a knowing inside of me. Can't explain it. After asking it a couple of simple questions and it answering them, it told me something. I can't remember for the life of me what it was, but I remember shaking my head yes that I understood. I remember feeling really sad when it left, like I wanted to go with it. I laid back down and went to sleep. Woke up, ran to my mom, and told her all about it the next morning. To this day, I take the time to go over that night and I remember what it looked like so I don't ever forget it. Also, I've tried to remember what it told me, but I can't. Maybe I'm not supposed to remember. Or I will when the time is right. I've never had sleep paralysis, and it was not a dream. Story number 4. Ask Reddit. I had an entity visit me in my room every night. I would feel and see the indent that it would leave on the mattress. Physically hear and feel the springs cave in under the weight of an invisible force. Every single night, too, I would feel it play with my hair and touch my face. It handled it with full denial, just pretended it wasn't happening as best as I could. One day I was arguing with my dad on the phone. It didn't like that, I guess. I had a closet door that was off the hinges, leaning against the wall. The door flung forward so hard it hit the corner of my dresser and it left a huge hole in the door. My dad heard the noise of the door and asked what that was. I was stunned. Told him, "The door to the closet just flung forward." Like I said, we were arguing, so he was just agitated and didn't believe me and said, "Doors don't just fall that hard." I know. Then one day as we were doing our nightly routine of it crawling into bed with me and me trying my best to ignore its existence, it decided it was sick of being ignored and grabbed my arm so hard it yanked my arm up. I screamed bloody murder, ran faster than I ever have in my life, ran up the stairs, and slept on the couch next to my dad, who happened to be asleep in his chair that night. I honestly think it felt bad for scaring me, because I never saw or heard from it ever again. After years of convincing myself I must have just had a months-long psychosis that I do not speak of, my dad one day asks me if I ever experienced anything weird in his basement at his old house. He had experienced everything I had described a few years later, when he made his man cave down there after I had moved out. Story number 5. 10-gallon fish tank water disappear overnight. Preface. The night before, I know 100% that my 10-gallon tank was filled to the brim because over the past 2 weeks, like half an inch had evaporated. So I refilled it to the top. Now, the story goes that the next day, when me and my family came back from work around 6 p.m., my aunt was the first to notice within 10 minutes of us being home. She yelled out, "There's no water in the fish tank." There was no water underneath the tank on the walls or inside of the little cupboard under the tank. Me and my cousins were rushed to refill it because we realized that the 6 fish that I had were still alive. This is even weirder because that means that this tank would have miraculously have emptied within the past 10 minutes of us being home, for the fish to still have been breathing, unfortunately. 3 died of stress the next day. But we've looked everywhere and couldn't find where those 10 gallons went. This happened 2 days ago. The tank is completely refilled again, hasn't leaked at all, meaning it wasn't a mechanical problem since we changed nothing. Also, I should know that the night before I did pray to God to give me some sort of sign that there was a higher being out there. So obviously the sequence of events really spooked me out. Story number 6. My dead cousin saved me from a shitty situation. In the early 2010s, I had a cousin who passed away in a terrible car accident while I was a young teen. At 18, he went head-on into an 18-wheeler and died instantly. He was meant to do great things and used to joke that I would have to follow in his footsteps, since we were the only ones in the family who really held education highly. Years later, I'm a college dropout, working dead-end jobs as a server, broke in my early 20s and drinking a lot. I was living with a random coworker who took me in, and they were in a very quiet neighborhood not far from the party spots. One night I drove home after drinking. I know. And I must have fallen asleep at the wheel for a moment. The dream I went into felt simultaneous as I looked to my passenger seat and saw my cousin sitting there smiling at me. He was glowing. My whole body calmed and warmed instantly when our eyes met. He didn't say anything other than, "Look." And as I looked forward, I woke up and saw the gate to be a closed community coming up straight ahead. I slammed the brakes and looked back, but he was gone. I stopped to breathe a minute before getting home, only 4 houses down or so. It was such a fast moment, but the memory is so clear, and a few years later I started questioning that it was a dream at all. Maybe it was him visiting to protect me. I think he'd be proud of me now. I ended up graduating and even having a master's degree. I hope that he can look down and smile. Story number 7. Ask Reddit. I was around 18 years old when this happened. One night I was sleeping when I was startled awake by super loud, high-pitched screeching. It was like a 5-year-old girl shrieking at the top of her lungs in terror. The way my room was oriented had the top of the top of me, perhaps, facing my closet, which was always open, and I sleep in pitch dark and silence. I immediately jumped out of my sleep. I was laying on my side and front, so I wound up in a push-up-like position and oriented my eyes where the sound came from, which had me staring straight into my open closet. I stayed frozen for a few seconds, thinking to myself, what in the world was that? I I must have dreamt it. It sounded so real, though. Guess it was one of those half-awake, half-dreaming things. I'd had moments in the past where I'm half asleep and would hear my name or a family member's voice say something and startle me. But it's always been during that, quote-unquote, half asleep and starting to dream state, but still aware of your surroundings. This was different, though, but that was the closest thing to an explanation I could come up with. This got my adrenaline pumping, I guess, because I was immediately wide awake and shaken. But I had work the next day, so I calmed myself down, told myself to go back to sleep. After all, I am an adult. Not 10 seconds into calming myself down and closing my eyes, it happened again. Exactly the same. Super loud, super high-pitched 5-year-old shrieking bloody murder at the top of her lungs. This time, though, I'm not anywhere near asleep as I had just settled myself back down. There was absolutely no way I was dreaming or hallucinating from being half asleep this time. In that moment, I unlocked my superpower. Turns out, I'm able to move at the speed of light. I was out of my bed through the closed doors and down the hallway so fast my feet didn't even touch the ground. Out of the bedroom, down the hallway, and straight into my mom's bedroom. "Mom, something's in my closet." I'm a grown adult man, running into my parents' room in the middle of the night, and nothing but boxers shouting that something was in my room. My mom and I went back to my room and looked all around and inside the closet. Nothing. I would sleep with my bedroom door open and hallway lights on for a solid week after this. I was working with my older brother at the time, so the next day I asked him, what kind of animal would make a loud noise that sounds a bit like a girl screaming bloody murder? He apparently thought I was telling a joke, because his reaction was to swing his gaze over to me and shout, "An ostrich?" Followed by holding a big grin on his face in anticipation of the answer. My response, "Then there was an ostrich trapped in my closet last night, I guess." I then told him what happened, which would prove to be a mistake. Spent the next month getting hazed by him and other construction coworkers about the little girl I keep tied up in my closet. Bastards. Never happened again, but freaks me out every time I think about it. I've told this story to various people over the years, and no one has ever come up with a good explanation. The most common conclusion people came up with is that it was just a hallucination or a dream while being half asleep. But I was absolutely 100% awake and alert on the second scream. I sincerely believe my home is being haunted by an evil spirit, and I need suggestions how to get rid of it immediately. So in a few weeks, or rather a few weeks ago, I started randomly waking up in the middle of the night, like my eyes would just open and there was always this shadow figure standing next to me or my husband's bedside, just staring at us. Creeped me out, but I figured maybe I was just nuts. And then I'd go back to sleep. Anyway, it started happening every night, and I started to have really bad nightmares. It got pretty bad to the point where I thought I was developing insomnia because my sleep was so awful. I finally told my husband about it last week. He got creeped out but said that he believed me and actually informed me that he's been having real bad sleep for the last few weeks as well. He also mentioned that he thought it was because he randomly picked up the habit of grinding his teeth at night, which made me realize that I had too, and it started for both of us a few weeks ago. This is not typical for us. Anyway, last night before bed, our daughter comes into our bedroom and asks if she could sleep with us. This is normal and occasionally happens. She just likes cuddling. And we were like, sure, no problem. So later in the middle of the night, our daughter wakes up screaming, "Why?" I grab her because it scared the crap out of me, and she starts crying, saying that she had a bad dream. I tell her to go back to sleep, and I cuddle her until she falls asleep. She wakes up this morning at 6 a.m. with me and my husband. That's what time he wakes up for work. And I typically will wake him up and wake up with him, usually have a conversation. I asked her what happened in her scary dream, and she said in her dream that she woke up and there was a scary shadow looking at her with no face, telling her that it was going to burn the house down. My husband overhears this conversation and looks terrified, as am I. Story number 9. Comforting conversation with dead brother at the bus stop. For some context of this, I was 7 when my older brother had passed away at the age of 18, on my 7th birthday no less. My mom has had experiences ever since he passed, where she thinks she sees him on the street, though I never have. Until a few years ago. I was thinking about it after someone was talking about how they were almost sure that they had walked past their dead grandfather on a busy street. I was about 16 or 17, and I'm 21 in January, alone for the very first time going through the Denver bus station around Christmas time. Being alone, scared, pretty much, it scared the hell out of me. It was my trip back home, and I was not digging being in the city Greyhound station at 10 p.m. I had sat on the ground where the bus was supposed to come and started to read a book. While I was sitting down reading, a guy asks if he can put his stuff near me and sit too. I said yes, and I didn't mind to even look up, and I didn't talk to men, no less at the bus stop. Don't blame you. Though I finally looked up when he started a conversation. He looked exactly like my brother and sounded like him. He asked where I was going and how the holidays went. The conversation somehow had hit a lot of points of my life up to from when he had passed, like how I moved up to the mountains and he wished that he could go see that mountain town. He talked about missing his girlfriend and asked if I had a partner. I was actually coming home from spending a few days with my first girlfriend and her family. He high-fived me for liking girls too, very on character for what my brother would have done. We talked about how I was starting to teach myself guitar, of which I was doing because my brother had. It was hard not to cry while talking to him, and his bus was the one that really came before mine. He said goodbye and left. I didn't get his name. He never said where he was going, only said that he was from a small town in northern Colorado, of which me and my brother are also. That was it. Came home and cried in my mom's bed for hours. Such a surreal experience. I'm wondering if that kind of thing happened to anyone else. Obviously, I've heard of people thinking that they've seen their dead family members, but not entirely having like a 30-minute conversation with. Story number 10. Coincidence or God really listened? Sorry for any grammatical mistakes. Don't worry. Don't worry, writer. Pretty good at skipping over those things. So, this is the event when I was about 13 years old. There was an old type of computer in our house whose monitor was like an old TV. At that time, flat LED screens were in the trends. I wanted that flat LED monitor, but I didn't tell this to my parents. If I talk about my childhood habits, I belonged to a religious family, and I used to worship God every evening during my childhood. One day, a great desire arose in my mind. I thought I should have a flat-screen monitor. Then I went to do the evening worship as usual. While doing worship, I was thinking of getting a new monitor, and then the most unexpected thing happens. As soon as I came out of the worship room, I saw that my father and elder brother were coming into the room with the flat-screen LED. They told me that they went to one of my uncles, and one of his friends had an extra monitor. So, he gave it to us. I think God really heard me that day, or it could be a big coincidence. But even today I realize how all this happened so quickly. A second after I finished the worship, my father came with the monitor. Does God really exist? And perhaps even listen to us all the time? Story number 11. Houses on a Graveyard. So some backstory. In Texas, there's a suburb that's just outside the Houston area that was built in the 70s over the 1800s graveyards. They pretty much removed the gravestones, but didn't move the bodies. So as time passes and the community gets bigger, they keep finding graves. The most recent graves that were found were about 2 or 3 years ago. And if you go into the forest, heading to the lake, you may find a gravestone or two. This is a story of a few of the experiences I've had living here. And for your information, this will be a lengthy post. So anyways, I had no knowledge of this when I bought my first home in 2019 in this community. We were so excited, and I don't know if the real estate agent knew the history of the land or not. So it wasn't mentioned to us. We actually lived there for a full year before we started having our first experiences. When my wife got pregnant in 2020, we were so excited. It was our first time, and we were outfitting my baby's nursery. On this day in particular, I was just about to build the crib. I had just picked up the heavy box from inside the garage. I went to open the door while struggling to reach for the door handle. Suddenly, the door flew open out of my hands, and due to this, I was expecting to see my wife on the other side of the door. She wasn't there. She was in the nursery. What made this even more weird is the door was a heavy door, one that would close under its own weight, and it wasn't a windy day. At this time, I thought it was strange, but really thought nothing of it. The second experience that we had in the house actually involves my wife. I was taking a shower and relaxing after a hard day's work. She had gone into the kitchen and started to cook dinner as I showered. She suddenly burst into the bathroom and she claimed that she saw a shadow heading to the nursery and assumed it was me. She said that she started talking, thought it was odd that I didn't reply, and looked over and saw no one was there. We would have things moved time, but excuse them, but we would have things move time to time, but thought we were forgetful and had moved them, but both of us never remembered moving the items. It wasn't until I buy a second house in the same community and go to rent out our first house that I learned the history of the community. A guy looking at the house told me what he knew of the graveyard, and after the conversation with him, I became curious and I started researching. I even found an Unsolved Mysteries episode about the community and the experiences that the first people of the community had, as well as all the lawsuits that happened thereafter. For those wondering, the buyers of the homes lost the cases due to the fact that the graveyard was considered abandoned when the developer took over, so there were no liabilities on them. Or so if I understand what I read correctly. Skipping to the next house, it started activity immediately. At this point of time, I have a 6-month-old and a toddler. My wife, myself, and the toddler were in the living room. My newborn was sleeping in the master. Suddenly, and with me and my wife both present to see it, a playpen ball flew out of our master and hit the wall. We both tried to figure out how it could have happened. We looked at the air conditioning if a toy nearby that could have launched the ball, but nothing. We couldn't explain how the ball was thrown that hard against the wall. The weirdest thing that happened was at 3 a.m. without fail. My 2-year-old daughter, who's autistic, wakes and wants to sleep with us. Sometimes she seems like she's scared. Sometimes she seems like she's normal. Now I don't know if this is learned behavior or something more, but I feel it's worth noting. Time and time again, we think we see shadows and dark masses. My wife says that she feels uncomfortable in the kitchen. I feel like I see things out of the corner of my eye, too. Now, to be forward, I won't call this paranormal because this could be from my own paranoia and makes me question if the small things I see are just my head. And if this really is what we speculate, it doesn't seem malicious. Story number 12. House on a Graveyard. Update. I was unsure. We had told a few friends, but no one would believe us, and I also finally told my wife what I'd actually noticed in my daughter's room. But I was unsure if it wasn't influenced by my own paranoia. Well, 2 events happened since my last post. First off, we have 2 dogs. They've never randomly barked or responded to anything, so that's what confuses me on these experiences. As I said in my last post, my daughter, without fail, will hop into our bed at around 3 a.m., plus or minus 30 minutes. Like I said in the past, I'm not sure if it's a learned behavior, but thought it was worth noting. Well, the other night, I was outside with my daughter, talking to my sister. Suddenly, my wife burst outside with my son in hand, in a scared tone said that she had heard one of my son's toys go off. She heard the toy and looked up and saw a black mass flying across the door of my daughter's room. It matches up with what I've been seeing. My only fear is since I told her what I've been seeing, she may be influenced, or was influenced by it. The mind works in mysterious ways, after all. The second experience, it was late at night, and I walk into the kitchen and I feel like I'm being watched. What's weird about this house is no matter what we see, we may feel a little bit uncomfortable, but we never feel threatened by whatever's here. Even my wife, who jumps at the sight of her own shadow, says that she doesn't feel threatened. Anyways, I walk into the kitchen and I see what looks like the shape of a head behind the side of the fridge. It disappeared as soon as I saw it. Like I've said, the dogs have never barked. We've never felt threatened. Story number 13. Houses on a Graveyard, Part 3. So it seems I'm doing this every 2 weeks as things are happening. And things have ramped up in the past week. There are some things that are pretty minor, and I can usually think of plausible explanations. And if I can think of an explanation, it's not worth telling. Plus, in my stories, I will lead you through my thoughts trying to debunk them. So here we go. Plus, this also involves my other property that I used to live in. So this is another long post. So we ended up telling a family member about what we've seen and heard so far at the house. This person doesn't really believe us, and that's fine. I understand, not everyone, or rather, not everyone will believe me on what's happened at this house. But I don't think whatever's at my house has the same understanding. It now seems whenever this person comes over, activity starts. One time, my family member came to watch a show. We have one show we religiously watch every week, and we were waiting for it to start. I was sitting at the dining room table eating dinner, and my wife and family member were in the kitchen chatting. Now, across the kitchen is a utility and laundry room. In there, it's kind of where we put the cat that we own that we'd let them eat. Because that cat loves food and will swipe a pork chop off your plate. I'm speaking from experience here. Anyways, we're all chatting and the cat starts meowing. A minute later, the door handle starts turning. Now, logically, one would think that the cat has learned how to turn the door handle. Here's the issue here. The doorknobs are round, and there's nothing for the cat to sit on to even get a grip if it even could turn knobs. That means the cat would have to hang off the doorknob and swing its body, while somehow holding the door. My family member blamed the cat, but it didn't make sense. I would have to have a talented cat, but my cat is fat and happy. On the same day, my daughter was playing with her toys while we were watching our TV show. After a while, the show ended and my wife and daughter went into the master and my family member and I stayed in the living room watching a new program. Now, my daughter has a lot of electronic noise toys that will eventually shut off after you stop playing with them. Usually 5 minutes after the last button was pushed. Anyways, my wife and daughter had been gone over an hour. Suddenly, one of the toys just starts going off, over and over. It wouldn't stop. I figured it would stop on its own, but it didn't. I eventually took out the batteries, and it did stop then. Now, I understand 9 times out of 10, a simple reboot will fix most electronics. But this one was odd. When I put in the same batteries, it didn't do it again. The following week, the family member came over and we were just hanging out. No TV or anything, just chatting. Suddenly, the TV turned on. Just the TV. Then it turned off. Then it came back on. You could hear the TV as it clicked on and off. Now, I have one of those automation systems that make my home a smart home, and the TV that turned on was surround sound. So the system would usually turn on multiple components to watch a program. Plus, it's on battery backup, so if power would crash, it would have a little bit of a time to watch TV. My neighborhood gets blackouts all the time, so I have battery backup on my router and main TV. So there is one remote for the whole system with other remotes in the attic. On top of that, I program these smart homes for a living room and have access to the program myself. There was nothing in the logs that told me that the TV would turn on, or in fact did turn on. Could it have been CEC or ARC that turned on the TV by accident? Nope. I turn all of those features off due to the system that I have. So how this TV turned on? I don't know. The TV doesn't have a power button on the physical set. There's an argument that there could be a malfunction, but I can't find it, and I have a technical background in this stuff. The last part of this update comes from other houses that I'm renting out. I was talking to my tenant, and in the middle of the conversation, she asked me if I knew if there was a need to redo windows. She told me that sometimes she feels cold in some rooms and some doors would slam. She claimed that she thought it could be the wind. Now, this house was built in 2019. When it came to freeze in 2020 in Texas, we lost power for 3 days. The house stayed at 55 degrees at its coldest, while it was in the single digits and teens outside. So the house was well built. I hired a window guy just in case to make sure that, everything was all good. I told her this, and she thought it was strange. So did I. We've had a warm summer here in Texas. She started renting in July. Now, when I lived there, the AC vents aren't on the doors, so the likelihood that it's air conditioning closing doors is let's just say it's not happening. It may explain cold, but when I lived there, I really didn't experience uneven cooling. I won't discount it as a possibility due to the system now being close to 5 years old, but doors slamming, I can't explain. Story number 14, Houses in a Graveyard, Part 4. So as an update, we've had some noticeable things happen that are kind of interesting. So starting this off, this particular update has more questionable stuff happen, as in the sense of its paranormal or possible coincidence. One night my daughter and I were playing hide and seek. Now she somewhat understands the concept, but she struggles on the concept of counting and then going to go seek. So what I do is I wait till she turns around away from me and I run away and hide. Sometimes she just chases me, or if I get her distracted or my wife distracts her, I'll get a good hiding spot. Once she realizes I'm gone, she goes around the house humming and squeaking. She doesn't speak, while looking for me. Well, one of the times I hid in the master closet. We have a decent-sized walk-in closet, and I usually leave the lights off and hide in there. Well, I was there hiding from my daughter to find me, and I hear a rustling of clothes that are hung a few feet away. I turn around and see nothing. Assume I may have bumped something, but then I hear it again. I stand in the dark looking in its direction, but I see nothing. I finally start hearing my daughter's hum, and I hear what sounds like hangers sliding on the dowel. I look behind me again, and this time my alert is high. It's dark enough that I can't see anything other than what's in front of the door. At this point, my daughter finds me, and I turn on the light, but I see nothing there. A couple days later, my curiosity leads me to download a ghost hunting app. Now, I know from what I read, a lot of them said that it was gimmicky and fake, but it seems that one called Ghost Tube was the least gimmicky, and when you download it, they claim it's legit. Is it real? I don't know. Anyways, I got 4 words. Stop recording, and this one said it 3 times. Annoying psychic, how are you? ×2. Not sure what that was supposed to be other than maybe I'm annoying for recording. We're starting to notice things are getting moved. And yes, I have toddlers. And it's given things, they'll gain toddler feet and walk away. However, a few nights ago, the family was in the living room, and I was holding my son and my daughter, and I was playing on the slide. In the kitchen that's adjacent to the living room was a pink ball that lit up when you bounced it. This ball suddenly lit up and started rocking, and it did for a solid 10 seconds at least. We all noticed it, even the kids. It was odd, to say the least. And then this morning, a shampoo bottle that I know is on the high shelf so my daughter can't reach it. Suddenly it appeared in front of the master bathroom water closet door. It's a little spooky. Story number 15, A Ghost Prostitute on New Year's Eve. It doesn't say it, but I'm going to just tell you guys that there's maybe a not safe for work warning happening here. Just given the title. Taking a leap. New Year's Eve 2022. 15 or so close friends and I were having a party with a friend. We'll call her Angie. It was her second home. She used to be a small destination bed and breakfast on the West Coast. I closed at least 50 years ago. Or maybe it was closed. So it was the perfect place to throw a party. Big common area, lots of rooms, extra beds. Despite being New Year's, we mostly had Halloween decor up on the walls. Similarly to this party, Andrew threw a small Halloween party with the same people. We just got a little drunk and played with some creepy ghost shit, one of our friends. Nothing big. It's important to note that when playing, only Angie believed in ghosts. The board didn't give us much. It just said something about a prostitute that used to take clients to the one master bedroom. So probably the 1850s. I wasn't fazed. But Angie was kind of freaking out, so we ended it quickly. After having spent so much time in the inn, she really believed it. So as not to upset her, no one ever asked her about what she thought of the ghost prostitute. She just seemed so freaked. Cut back to New Year's. My friend and I are definitely more tipsy than on Halloween and are playing a drinking game in the inn sunroom, which has large glass windows. Suddenly, in the middle of the other friend and her boyfriend, we'll call them Dakota and Abe, taking shots, there's a large bang on the window. Everyone looks up, laughs it off, and assumes a bird hit the window. Or it was our other friend that we'll call Mark. Mark wasn't feeling the drinking game, and he said that he was going to go explore some of the suites on the top floor. He had probably just got bored, went outside, and stupidly wanted to pull a joke on us. I look over at Angie, and she's just staring at the window, wide-eyed. Angie says, "Abe, go check it out." Abe responds that Angie should, herself, since it's her parents' inn. But all she says is, "I'm not fucking going out there." Abe, clearly annoyed, grabs his drink, walks out onto the back steps of the inn. Behind the building is just a large field with no roads. The field ends at the edge of the cliffs, and then it's just ocean. Abe walks out on the steps and mockingly spins around, showing that no one's out there. Angie's still clearly freaked out, so to try to calm her nerves, I step outside on the porch with Abe, showing her that it's safe. Nothing spooky. I turn around to Abe and tell him to stop freaking Angie out when I see a glimmer of something behind his right shoulder. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like a car light, but eerily misshapen, like someone carved out a headlight before attaching it to their car. Normally, even with the weird shape, I wouldn't think anything of a parked car, but it was behind the inn. No one should even have access to drive behind the inn, and I know that no one at the party did, because I came early to help Angie set up. Keys were taken at the entrance, too, so no way somebody could run back to their car after entering the inn and drive their car around and leave it running in the back of the inn. I looked back at Abe, who also saw the light. He wasn't frozen in fear, but he did just stand there, eyes wide, like the light had stuck him in a sober trance. After that, we all heard a bang from the kitchen. After the 10 or so of us ran over to check what it was, we found that the frozen pizza that was in the oven had exploded. Then immediately after, there was a loud boom from above the kitchen, most likely from the master bedroom. No one wanted to check it out, but Dakota made Abe and a couple of friends that he brought go upstairs and check. They were so scared that they took a baseball bat. Waiting for them to creep up the stairs felt like an eternity. The lobby was eerily quiet, like the air had settled in place, and it froze time for 3 minutes. Then I hear Abe yell down the staircase, "The lamp just fell down in the master bedroom." After that, the clock struck 12 and we tried to continue with the party. But everyone was freaked. Abe and I didn't even tell the others about the weird headlight that we saw, because we were just too scared. We live in an area with a lot of homeless people, so maybe someone was watching us. But that doesn't explain the pizza exploding and the lamp falling one after another, like someone was taunting us. I don't even know if the 3 events are connected. Angie thinks they are, but I don't believe in ghosts as much as her. But I'll never get over that engulfing feeling of being watched that I felt when standing on the deck. And I know, despite not saying anything, that Abe felt it too. Story number 16. Anyone else have a similar experience? I hope this is the right group but I've tried for years to explain to friends and family something that me and my friend experienced, that to this day everybody says that we imagined. I came across this subreddit and thought maybe somebody else had had something similar happen. And by the way, what happened to me and my friend was real. We were sitting in her bedroom and it was around 1 a.m. Her brother was in the room just next door sleeping, and so were her parents down the hall. Her bedroom had those huge built-in closet mirrors. They were sat on a set of drawers that were empty. So her bedroom was set up so that her bed sat opposite the mirrors on the wall. I was sat on her bed with my back on the wall facing the mirror, and she was sat on the floor facing me, her back against said mirror. We were both having a rough week, and we were basically trauma dumping, letting go of some pretty heavy feelings. This is the part I can't explain, so I try to just imagine what I mean when I'm explaining it, because I don't even know 100% what I saw. In literally 5 seconds, I watched this black fuzzy ball just shoot up to the ceiling behind my friend. What I saw wasn't a shadow or something reflecting against the wall. It was a pitch black, uneven ball that had an aim. It's like it started in the bottom corner and shot up to the ceiling, then flew across the ceiling as it dimmed in the light. Went for like a split second, then it went across. At this point, I closed my eyes and I felt an insane amount of pressure, almost like when somebody pushes your head and shoulders and tells you to try and resist. It's the best way I can describe it. While this is all happening, my best friend, who's on the floor at the same time that I'd seen this dark matter, she literally jumped on me. Like when I say jumped, I mean she leapt off the floor and jumped into my arms. We were both terrified. We couldn't speak or move, and we were gripping each other so fucking tight her nails had dug into my arm, and I still have a tiny scar. When I opened my eyes, I grabbed my friend's wrist and noped the fuck out. She lived on a 4-acre block, so we legit ran out of the house and into her mom's garden. It took us some time to start speaking normally again, but we started thinking, what the fuck was that? She told me she felt the most insane amount of tingles up her back, so bad that she knew something was wrong, and said she just jumped on me. She also said it felt like I was sinking, like so far down into the bed, which is why she was gripping me so hard. I told her how I felt pushed by the thing. There's more to it, but it's small things like we'd experienced her lamp turning on and off. It's one of those touch-sensitive lamps. And she'd never had it happen before, but it didn't freak us out like the black matter did. We aren't friends anymore, but we had so many conversations about it, and up until we had stopped being friends, one of our last conversations was pretty much all surrounding the fact of, what the fuck was that? Story number 17. My Boyfriend's Strange Stories, Part 1. For context, my boyfriend and his family are from a very rural area of Chiapas, Mexico. He brought these 2 stories up today while we were at work. His family normally had gatherings and reunions, and these stories involve his aunt and grandpa. Story number 1. Aunt is a pig farmer. She talked about how her pigs would squeal and pace the pens during the night, almost as if something was bothering them every night for a month. She eventually couldn't take the noise and came outside around 1 to 4 a.m. She claimed in her story that she saw a dark figure on top of one of her pigs, and her quote was that it was fucking her. Excuse me. She then shouted at the figure and it jumped off the pig, walked away into the darkness, and then the sun rose. She went to check on her pig. Apparently, the one that had been targeted had strange burn marks all over its hindquarters. She claimed the pig wasn't able to get pregnant months after this event, and therefore she decided to kill it. The pig didn't put up a fight or make a noise. My boyfriend told me that they used the blunt side of a hatchet to do the deed. Story number 2. Grandpa's a land caretaker and a landscaper. He takes either his horse or his bike to the properties on dirt paths. Normally goes before the sun rises. He uses a flashlight to guide his way, and while he was on his way to a property for the day, the flashlight began to flicker and eventually turn off. He continued on the path anyway, and when the sun began to rise, the flashlight came back on, and another smaller path was visible veering off of the main one. He decided to follow it a few meters and noticed some peculiar footprints. He described them as bare human feet with an elongated big toe with a long, sharp toenail that imprinted the ground with every step. The small path eventually faded into the shrubs and disappeared. More of my boyfriend's stories. Story 1. When my boyfriend was around 8 or 9, he lived with his paternal grandmother on a decently large plot of land. The land was marked by 4 concrete fences and long poles. I think they were street lamps, but I'm not sure. He told me that he remembers standing outside with his grandmother in her front porch, not screened in, and had the urge to look along the property line. There he saw half the face of what he described as a strange human creature with a beaked mouth. It taunted him, quote-unquote, and stuck its forked tongue out at him. He said he was too shocked to point out the thing that he saw to his grandmother. When the shock went away, he said that if she saw anything, she would tell him. According to him, she ignored his question and went inside. The story seems to bother him a lot, and I've noticed how nervous he gets looking at the tree lines or driving in the woods at night. For reference, he lived in Chiapas. This area borders a large jungle. Howler monkeys, tapir iguana, jaguar, all of them live around him. Story 2. He spoke a lot about how him and his family would cram into a pickup truck and get to family parties or birthdays. One night they were returning from a party. Him and his cousins were sitting in the bed, and they were holding flashlights in that truck. They'd flash them at the tree lines and on the gravel road. Apparently, the entire time they were driving from the party to their homes, they could hear something just beyond the tree line keeping pace with the truck. Then something was chasing or following them. I think it could have been monkeys or a jaguar. Story 3. This was a more recent story that my boyfriend had relayed to me from his gym friend. Not totally familiar with the myth about cadejos and brujas that turn into large black dogs, but that's what his friend claimed to see. When his friend would go to bed, he'd hear shuffling near the windowsill. His window was covered by a curtain, and out of curiosity, he pulled it back and peeked out, seeing a large black dog with red eyes towering over the window and staring at him. Of course, he was frightened by it, ran by the window, went to sleep, and there were no paw prints on the ground the next morning. I believe his friend is from El Salvador. Story 4. Another one of my boyfriend's stories comes from his paternal grandmother. When his grandmother and grandfather were younger, they would take their canoe out to the canals and rivers to go fishing, usually from midday till late night. Night had come, his grandma had decided to lay back down in the canoe to rest. Well, apparently, as they were floating along the canal, they heard patterings of feet and rustling of trees above them. They had claimed stones and glass had been thrown at them from the trees, as well as whispers and gibberish. What they think it was is called a duende. They're creepy. Even his family here believe in them. I personally think monkeys.